Great.
Cheers.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Brendan.
Great. Peter, do you want to come through and set the scene, and then we'll move through the team?
Good morning, everyone. It's just a quick couple of slides from me to provide some context before we go on, and then we'll move to Russell Holden, Andrew Jeffries and the finance team to step you through the detail. Look, apologies to those of you who've heard some of this context before. It will be brief. We've followed a quite detailed process here. Councillors and staff have worked together numerous times since October, really, but certainly November, December, to bring down what was initially a very intimidating potential rates increase. We've worked closely with elected members, the community boards, and this is the second of the public briefings so that our community can follow the process that we're following and how we've done it. I know that you're well aware of these conditions. This slide hasn't changed in a couple of months because the situation hasn't changed. We're still looking at a very stable cost of living increase, and anybody who's been to a supermarket or anywhere else knows what that looks like. Inflation is still with us and appears to be steady. The revaluation impacts we'll talk through in detail, and you've just heard the briefing on that. The net effect is that there's a compound effect on our communities that is concerning. We're seeing some early signs of the effects of that, and they will probably continue through the coming year. So in that light, we've worked hard on bringing the number down in two ways. One is looking at best value for money and efficiencies, and you'll see that in the OPEX savings that Russell will step you through. There's also been, I think, a rephasing is a better word for the capital program to bring it down to a deliverable level where we can provide certainty that what we're doing is actually, what we're proposing is something we can actually deliver in the environment we're in. That means that some of our work has had to be rephased out to future years. There will be options on adjusting the business differential, and that's obviously something quite complex and detailed. The team will step you through how that's more of a problem of distribution than quantum of the rates. The net effect is that we started at 14.6% as a raw number. We've brought that down as a team of staff, councillors and other stakeholders, down to about 7 through savings and rephasings and the conventional steps. Then there's a further reduction down to 5.6%. But that's been achieved, and I want to stress this, by a series of one-off savings that cannot be replicated every year. They're not sustainable in the long term. This is a special year, and we've put in the whole team has put in a special effort to bring it down to 5.6, which I think will compare very favourably to other authorities around the country, simply because we're well aware that this is going to be an exceptional year for a lot of people. So that's the context to where we started and where we've got to, and what's to be deliberated today. The two main topics, and they're provided separately so that we're clear that they are separate issues. One is the impact of the revaluation. So at this point, I'll hand over to Russell Holden, Andrew Jeffries, to step you through the breadcrumb trail of how we got to 5.6 and take the discussion from there.
Thanks very much, Peter. Councillors, good morning to everybody. So just given that the presentation by Credible Values, we thought it pertinent to start off this part of the briefing with just going through the revaluation, the impact it's going to have on rates, and some mitigating factors that we're proposing to put in place. So I'll just hand you over to Andrew now, and he'll run through that, and we'll take some questions at the end.
Great. Thank you, Russell. Thanks, Peter. So I'm going to cover a quick introduction to rates and the revaluation. We'll look at the 2022 revaluation specifically, and then we're going to look at the implications of that for rates increases, and then we'll have a chat about the business differential, which is one way that we can respond to some aspects of the rates increase. And we'll finish by looking at the rates increases by suburb. This slide has got a lot in it, but essentially down the left-hand side, we've tried to list every one of our 16 rates. And I've sort of grouped them into categories: general rates, targeted rates, and excess water rates. And on the right-hand side, you can see the size of those rates in terms of revenue. And the takeaway from that is that the biggest rate is our general value-based rate, which is right up the top. We've also got a little bit of, the other ones that are quite significant are the 3 water targeted rates: sewer, water supply, and land drainage. Also, we'll notice that the based on column, a lot of our rates, and especially all the big ones, are capital value based. So we're very capital value dependent in Christchurch for our rating. The other thing to highlight from this is the differentials column. Some of our rates have differentials which allow us to charge some groups a kind of a multiplier effect of that rate. And in particular, looking at the general rate that has differentials for standard, business, remote, rural, and city vacant. And we're going to come back in particular to the business differential later in the presentation. So it's worth remembering in this slide where the business differential fits in. Just take you through the way that we calculate rates. In our annual plan process, just before, in late June, council will approve a number of decimals, 1 decimal for each of our rates, and that decimal is on the right-hand side there, and the left-hand side shows how we calculate that decimal. And so, if I use an example, say, of the sewerage rate, we'd take the revenue requirement for the sewerage rate, would be the top line divided by the tax base for the sewerage rate. And the sewerage rate tax base is essentially the capital value of all properties that pay that sewer rate, that are essentially close to the sewer network. And that's how we reach the decimal. I won't go through the example, but that you can reflect on. A really key point to make about the revaluation is that the revaluation itself doesn't change total rates for the city. And the example I use is this pie over the right-hand side there. The pie represents our planned rates revenue. The capital values in the city are really just a way of divvying that pie up between different ratepayers. So if capital values change, the pie stays the same size, but the way we divvy that up between ratepayers can change. At risk of kind of overemphasizing this point too much, if you own 1% of the city, roughly speaking, you'll pay 1% of the rates. And reflecting on that, it does mean that if all capital values were to increase, let's say by 50%, that would actually have no impact whatsoever on rates. Everyone would pay the same amount as before. Of course, we don't have just the revaluation happening, we've also got the rates increase as part of the annual plan. So we need to remember whether we're looking at just the revaluation impact or the revaluation plus our annual plan stuff for next year. I think I've covered most of that. So just to repeat that the reason we rate on capital value is essentially because at the moment we think it is the best tool that we have available for indicating ability to pay.
So Andrew, just for absolute clarity, and I'm looking at our media colleague just to your right.
Yes.
This means the council does not get more money at all. It's the pie remains exactly the same size. It's the distribution within, because often that is difficult to understand, and I appreciate why that might be.
Great. So the revaluation, as we've said, it has to be undertaken every 3 years, and the last time we did it was August 2019. Key dates which you've heard from QV this morning are that we're basing the valuations on market conditions as they were at the 1st of August 2022. Essentially, we are taking a physical snapshot of what's in place at a particular point in time, say 16 January, and we're valuing that based on market conditions at the 1st of August.
1st of July.
Yes, and and that valuation will apply for rates from the 1st of July 2023. The revaluation does show residential rating units increasing quite a lot, and in particular more than business rating units, which will be relevant in some of our future slides. Because without some kind of reaction from council, that will transfer the rates burden away from the business sector and towards the residential sector. This is a distribution of CV changes. So on the bottom axis, you've got the percentages that the CV has changed. We've got a residential curve, which is sort of in the middle, the blue one, and that is centered, roughly on about 47% CV increase. On the left-hand side, you've got the sort of orange one, which is red in my chart, is businesses. And a key point here is that businesses, the distribution essentially of the business CV rates increases is to the left of the residential curve. I've also shown remote rural, and now remote rural, the green one, is actually quite a small sector, but I'm scaling everything up to 100%, if that makes sense. So the green one, looks quite high, but in fact it's a very small sector. And the black one is just everything that's not covered in the other ones, which is about 15% of the city. And the spike, by the way, at 100% on the right-hand side is mostly vacant land, which is in the other category. This chart is very similar to the last one, but now I'm showing the rates impact due to the revaluation. And importantly, again, just coming back to the pie, the average rates increase from the revaluation will be 0. But that doesn't mean everyone has a 0%. It means that on average it is. Some people will be impacted and have higher rates because of the reval, but whenever you've got someone higher, there'll be someone lower. And again, the key point is that the residential bell curve is to the right of the business bell curve. And the centre, essentially, the centre of gravity of the blue bell curve is about 3.4%. So on average, residential properties will get a 3.4. And the centre of gravity of the business one is minus 12%. So a rates decrease of 12% for businesses. Our key headline number for rates increase is that 5.6%. It's worth remembering that 5.6% is made up of the increase in our rates requirement, less growth in the city. So in fact, our rates requirement might be going up, say 6.9%, but because we've got 1.3% genuine growth in our city, the increase to existing ratepayers is 5.6. It's important to distinguish in your minds the difference between genuine growth in the city and growth that's just due to a revaluation. So the 1.3, we're trying to extract the genuine growth that we're expecting to happen in the city. The 5.6% is also broken down primarily. That is an increase in the Three Waters targeted rates. The general rates increase is very low, or essentially negligible. So it's worth keeping that in mind, that what we got here is quite a significant increase in our Three Waters targeted rates. Just a technical note, I've increased the UAGC from 145 to 153 in this analysis. That's the uniform annual general charge that we have, trying to keep it in line with other rates. This next chart is again very similar to the last one, but this time we're including the annual plan 5.6% increase. So essentially what we're doing here is taking all those curves and shifting them to the right by 5.6%. That's not exactly what it is, but it's pretty close intuitively. That does mean that if we don't do anything like, for example, change the business differential, the average house will have an increase of 10.5%. And remember, that is the average house. So based on the bell curve, some houses will have considerably higher than 10.5 and some would have considerably lower. And again, we've got our business sector having a rates decrease on average. Just coming back to the business differential, our business differential is applied to any property used for a commercial or industrial purpose, or zoned commercial or industrial, except where it's used for a residential purpose. Now, the business differential at the moment is 1.697, and I've just put some other cities and their business differentials up there to show that our current business differential is very low relative to other cities at the moment. We're going to put forward two options for you today. The first is that we don't make any change to the business differential, and then the rates impact for FY24 will be as we showed a couple of slides ago, that one there. Option 2 will be to change the business differential, and that is what staff are recommending. The proposal aims to ensure that the business sector pays the same proportion of rates as they did in the current year, and residential sector would pay the same proportion of rates as they do this year. It moves, jumping back 2 slides, it moves the red bell curve and the blue bell curve closer together. The intent for that is just to prevent a greater rates burden being placed on the residential sector, and we remember those residential rates increase numbers from a couple of slides ago. So our recommendation is to increase the business differential from 1.697 to 2.25. We will provide you with a section 101.3 analysis, which would like you to consider, as that's required to consider this in the context of that section. This is the distribution of rates increases that people are going to face if we were to increase the business differential to 2.25. It's brought the blue and the red curves together, and the average rates increases are now essentially our 5.6 number. So we've got 5.7% for the average house, 5.6% for the average business. Again, individual properties will vary, which is what a bell curve communicates to us. I've got a few more slides. They're going to show the impact on residential properties by suburb, the rates impact, and then we'll just quickly look at some example properties. Some key points when we look at residential properties by suburb is that obviously some suburbs will have increased in value more than others, and while those property owners have, I guess, increased equity, increased wealth, they will be paying higher rates. If your CV goes up more than average, you will attract slightly higher rates increases. The differences between suburbs are really an unavoidable feature of the fact that we base rates on capital value, and we have to have a revaluation every 3 years. So that naturally leads over time to suburbs moving in different ways. This is a chart that's a bit similar to the one that QV showed us earlier. Pay attention to the blue bars first of all. That's our rates increase for next year on average by suburb. So take someone in the middle, say Burwood. That would be a rates increase of, I'm guessing about 5.7, 5.8% on average for Burwood residential properties. We have some out the right, in particular some of our lower value suburbs, particularly say in eastern Christchurch on the would be the right hand 3 columns. But we also have some higher value suburbs with high-ish increases. We've got Maryvale and Beckenham and Cashmere, all sort of quite to the right hand side there as well. The orange bars represent the increase that would arise purely from the revaluation, and generally that makes up a component of the blue bar. There's one suburb, the Peninsula, which is a bit different from everyone else, and that's because only about 30% of Peninsula properties pay the targeted rates. So they've actually increased in value a lot out in the Peninsula, but because they tend not to pay targeted rates, the rates increase doesn't really affect them so much. Remember, our rates increases focused more on targeted rates than on the general component. These are some example properties. I've chosen 6 properties, 1 for each suburb, and I've tried to choose properties that are very average for that suburb. So we've got 6 suburbs form our columns, and I know this is sort of death by numbers a little bit, so we'll just get ourselves oriented in what this table means. The top 3 rows show capital value for each suburb, and in particular for this one property that I've chosen for each suburb, and I've got the old capital value and the new capital value and the percentage increase. And you'll notice essentially I've listed these suburbs from left to right in order of the size of that percent increase in capital value. Then the next row shows the current rates that house pays in FY23. The next 3 rows show what the rates would be in FY24 if we kept the business differential unchanged at 1.697. And I've shown the dollar change and the percent change by suburb. And then the next 3 rows are the same information, but if we increase the business differential to 2.25, which you'll remember brings down the residential rates increase. The key numbers for me are to think about the suburbs that are increasing the most in capital value. That would be, say, Bromley. And we're looking at about a 12.5% rates increase on average for Bromley residential properties. Another point perhaps to bring out is that the dollar value of the increase obviously also depends on the size of the capital value of the property. So you'll notice Merivale and Cashmere properties near the bottom of this table are actually paying a higher rates increase in dollar terms than the Bromley property. Almost last slide. This is similar information but for non-residential properties. I think I'll let you kind of absorb this on your own, except to note that it is slightly curious that we've got a non-rateable property on the right-hand side. I would have thought non-rateable properties pay no rates at all, but in fact they do pay rates. They pay only the sewer and water rate. And so when you've got a very high value non-rateable property, like this is a school, they do actually pay, moderately significant rates. But remember, they're only paying the sewer and water rate there. And for a lot of non-rateable properties, like churches and some other non-rateable properties, we do have a rates remission, which can remit even these rates. Just to finish off, last slide, revaluation next steps, I think we've covered that. We did get audit clearance on Friday, which I was very pleased about. Nationally, there's a lot of councils are not getting audit approval or struggling to get audit approval. So it is really good that we've managed to get that audit approval on Friday for our valuation numbers. We're going to be putting them on our website tomorrow. We'll send out the letters after Waitangi weekend. You've got until 16 March to object, and we'll use those valuations from 1 July 2023.
Great, thank you very much, Andrew. And I just really appreciate the presentation you've done. I know we had one from you on this topic before Christmas, and again, yes, it certainly informed me a lot more about, I guess, how rating works, but also the impact of the external factors like the QV doing the valuations on us. And I guess what is really telling from this is you've been able to get the balance right between, and the biggest thing for me was around ensuring that even though differentials may change, actually the quantum of money and sort of which part of the pipe sits hasn't really changed. And I think you struck a really good balance there, and even relative to the rest of the country. So really appreciate the presentation. We have got a few minutes before we're going to have a break. So we'll go with Sarah, and then Aaron, then Yanni, and then Tyrone.
Just a couple of quick questions for clarification. The business differential, how does the proposal, our current business differential and the proposal compare to other metropolitan centres? That might be useful.
So at 2.25, we're still lower than everyone I can see on that table.
Yeah. And the slide you've got with the suburbs, what it makes it, I'm just wondering if there's the potential to put an extra line in at some point if this is going to be used for broader communications around the annual plan and things. Mm-hmm. What it does do is make it look like the change in the business differential has made people's rates go up further than the revaluation. Did you see what I mean? Like the blue line is higher because it includes the business differential. And I'm just wondering if that could be separated out, because actually the business differential thing lowers them a bit, and then it's the rates increase itself that puts them back up again.
I could provide a third bar which would show the increase if we kept the business differential unchanged.
Because at the moment it looks like that's made them go up.
Yep.
Business differential questions again. When was the last time that moved? How long have we run that number for? The current number?
It has moved slightly in some years. I can't,
up or down?
Both. Basically, since the earthquakes, I won't say it hasn't changed. It has changed slightly. I think I actually provided a slide on this at a previous presentation. It's not in this pack. But I could send that out again. It just shows the history of our business.
Let's do that, Andrew. Let's just resupply the information so members have got reminded of it.
If the valuations had gone the other way,
Yeah.
say residential had moved or gone down or whatever, and business was up, would we adjusted the business differential so they didn't take as big a hit?
That would be for you to decide. But
So I guess that is probably it's a really good point because, and again, it's probably worth just reminding everyone, this isn't a decision that's been made. This is a potentially a proposal. So there'll be debate around it. It's like whether that differential comes back and we put more onto residential and things like that. So yeah, it'll definitely be worked through, but it will be a council decision after feedback. Yeah. Okay, Yanni and then Tyrone.
Yeah, thank you. I was just wondering, like QV have already got the new valuations up, but our website's is down. So is there any reason why QV have them up ahead of our own website? And when will our own website be showing the new property valuations?
Our website will be showing it tomorrow. I think I'm actually hoping to get it up tonight, but it may well be first thing tomorrow morning.
But just so I'm clear, we got valuation sign off only on Friday, didn't we? We got clearance on Friday.
We got clearance on Friday. We've had the weekend. We've been uploading the values from the QV.
The point I'm trying to make is you've only had about 3 days, including a weekend.
Oh, no, but I just find it weird that QV would be able to release them ahead of us as a council.
Well, it's not a question for Andrew. So have you got a different question?
Just in terms of the UAGC, thank you for the response. So that would have an impact in reducing the percentage increase for the poorest areas that have got the biggest increases. So I'm just trying to understand why you're still recommending an increase to UAGC rather than a further reduction. Because it seems like that would be one of the levers you could pull to get a more equitable distribution of the percentage increase.
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. So the reason for the movement is the UAGC at this point is just in alignment with the general rate. The UAGC is just a portion of the general rate. The general rate is mixed up of two parts. One is the CV per property, and the other is the UAGC that's paid per property. So any movement, of course, in the UAGC will have an impact. But we did do some calculations, and it's fairly minor in the movement.
It does change things a little bit, but some suburbs will go up and others down slightly. So it still leaves, a very similar looking distribution, but some suburbs would be different.
But it does look like from the graph that you provided that the lowest economic areas that have got the biggest, the nearly 12 to 13% rates increase are the ones that would benefit the most by a reduction of the UAGC.
Yeah, low value properties will benefit more from reducing the UAGC. That's true.
And just the final question I had was just trying to get my head around kind of that QV stuff. Like in terms of the land values, which seem to be very, very high in the in some areas, is that? I mean, it's kind of a bit like the question Councillor Kieran asked, but like the land value is driving up property prices, and the land value is high because of the permissive zoning that we have.
Yeah.
So is it kind of fair to kind of make the assumption that some of the reasons why the properties prices have gone through the roof in the lower socioeconomic areas has been the developers paying a huge premium for bare land?
I think through you, Chair, it's difficult to say exactly all the reasons, and I think the guys from QV sort of attempted to do that. It's basically the data is built on sales history. So what's driving that demand for those properties, and generally it can be price. If you can get into the market, that's your starting point, and there's lots of demand for people coming into the market, then that's just going to drive up. It's a classic supply and demand.
Yep, I think you've asked and answered. Tyrone?
Actually, just to extend on that a little bit. So, obviously, just the distribution is different on different suburbs. So let's just say the suburbs where there's a negative number. So, in terms of the market dynamic, is that these suburbs have been historically overvalued, or perhaps become less desirable? Or maybe a combination of
I
those.
think it just shows that those suburbs, say Avonhead, have increased in value less than other suburbs. And just to sort of emphasise this, the valuations are based on sales, actual market sales that have happened. So it's not something that we kind of are causing or some methodological, error or something that actually reflects real sales that have happened. So,
So
we
softer demand in those suburbs, probably.
yeah, I mean,
Indicative of less
That's right.
desirability.
Tyrone, looking at it, it's Central City, Avonhead, Ilam, so you could even blame Jake and I as the local reps.
yeah.
Okay, any other questions? Celeste, yep.
Just wanted if you could sort of reconfirm a bit of information about the UAGC.
Yes.
I note that it's within the revenue and financing policy that recognises the regressive nature of it, so it does tend to impact lower income households. Have we done some modelling around, because I see it's gone up slightly rather than going down. Have we looked at adjusting that down?
So we've provided separately in a previous presentation a chart showing fixed charges at a range of different councils, including all the big cities and others near us, Waimak and Selwyn. I think we need to look at not just the UAGC but all fixed charges, because it's fixed charges as a whole that impact the ratepayer, and we are one of the lowest councils around in terms of our fixed charges. Yes, we could reduce the UAGC. That would be a decision you could make, but we would be then even more heavily dependent than we are at the moment on capital value as our way of recovering rates.
And I see that there was a comment there that we can look at increase. It can potentially come from the business differential. That could, in terms of lost revenue, we could use that as another means to recoup some of the lost revenue from the UAGC. Is that right?
I see. So if the UAGC went down, that means we need to recover more money from the CV-based rate, and that means that of that money that we have to recover, remembering that the value-based rate has the differentials in it, so it would tend to push that towards business. Following the logic through, that means business would pay a higher proportion of rates than it does now, so we'd have to reduce the business differential to keep them at the same proportion. So there's a lot happening, mathematically when you reduce the UAGC. I've provided, I think, to councillors some information about what a $50 UAGC would do.
Okay, so I think that concludes this part of the presentation. We might have a 10 so thank you both very much for that. That was really informative, and I can assure you it won't be the last time you're back in front of us over this issue. So it's 20 to 11. Can everyone come back at 10 to 11? So 10 minutes, and we'll get through to the next bit. I think, Peter, you're going to start that off, aren't you? So.